Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today's story is one that reveals the brutal twists of war, the kind of turn no one sees coming until it's too late. For months, Russian forces believed they had gained the upper hand, that their strategy had worked, and that victory was finally within their grasp. But as history has shown time and time again, in war, overconfidence can be the deadliest enemy. What happened next proved that what Russia thought was a victory was actually the beginning of a devastating collapse. At first, Russian commanders were celebrating. Their propaganda machine was in full swing, spreading stories of triumph, power, and control. Russian soldiers posted videos from captured villages, waving flags and claiming the land as their own. They truly believed they had crushed Ukrainian resistance in several regions. Moscow echoed this message to its people. The operation was going as planned. The Kremlin presented itself as unstoppable, but beneath the surface, a quiet storm was forming, one that would soon tear apart that illusion of victory. Ukraine was never truly defeated. While Russian troops advanced, Ukrainian intelligence watched, learned, and adapted. Every Russian movement, every convoy, every supply route was being tracked. The moment Russia believed the battle was over was the moment Ukraine began preparing for the counterstrike. The Russians thought they had secured key positions in the Donbas and southern regions, but they were unknowingly walking into a trap built on patience, precision, and technology. As Russian forces pushed forward, their supply lines stretched thinner and thinner. They captured land, yes, but land that was soon to become a logistical nightmare. Long roads, open fields, and vulnerable bridges connected their positions. Ukrainian drones and artillery units waited for the perfect time to strike. When the counteroffensive began, it hit like lightning. Suddenly, those long supply chains turned into perfect targets. Ammunition depots exploded, fuel convoys were burned to ashes, and communication lines went silent. Russian units found themselves stranded, surrounded, and cut off. What had looked like a clear victory turned into chaos. Soldiers who had proudly shared videos of their success were now desperate for reinforcements. Commanders were scrambling for orders, and confusion spread through the ranks. Ukrainian forces used speed, surprise, and superior intelligence to retake lost ground. Cities that had fallen to Russia were liberated one after another, sometimes within days. The world watched as Russian troops retreated from territories they had once declared as theirs forever. The turning point came when Ukrainian units launched precision attacks on key Russian logistics hubs. It wasn't about fighting on every front. It was about cutting off the lifelines that kept the Russian army moving. The use of advanced Western, supplied weaponry like HIMARS systems changed the game completely. Russian warehouses and command centers that had seemed untouchable were suddenly within range. One by one, these crucial assets were destroyed. The illusion of control began to crumble. But what made the situation even worse for Russia was internal disorganization. The lack of coordination between military branches, poor communication, and outdated equipment turned every minor setback into a major defeat. Reports surfaced of entire Russian battalions being left without food or ammunition for days. Soldiers began abandoning their positions, surrendering, or fleeing. The image of an invincible army was shattered. Meanwhile, Ukraine's morale only grew stronger. The people who had endured months of occupation and bombardment now saw their defenders returning. Towns that had been silenced under Russian control erupted in celebration. Ukrainian flags replaced Russian ones on public buildings. This wasn't just a military victory. It was a symbolic one, a reminder that occupation doesn't equal control, and that the human spirit can't be conquered so easily. Inside Russia, the mood began to shift. State TV could no longer hide the scale of the losses. Families were demanding answers. Videos of destroyed Russian convoys and captured soldiers flooded social media despite censorship efforts. The once confident narrative of liberation turned into confusion and anger. Even pro-Kremlin voices started questioning what was really happening on the front lines. What the Russian leadership didn't anticipate was the sheer resilience of Ukraine and the unity of the West. Every Russian victory became short-lived because Ukraine had learned to turn setbacks into opportunities. When a city fell, they didn't give up. They adapted, regrouped, and struck back harder. The West continued to supply advanced weaponry, training, and intelligence, amplifying Ukraine's capabilities to levels the Kremlin hadn't expected. By late 2023 and into 2024, Ukraine's tactics evolved even further. Small, agile drone units began operating deep behind Russian lines. These weren't just surveillance drones. They were equipped for precision strikes, targeting command posts, radar systems, and fuel depots. Russia had spent billions building massive defense lines, trenches, bunkers, minefields, but Ukraine found ways to break through them with speed and creativity. What Russia thought was an impenetrable defense turned into a graveyard of burned-out vehicles and destroyed fortifications. Then came the psychological blow. Videos circulated of Ukrainian special forces planting flags in areas that Russia had declared annexed. These moments weren't just symbolic. They shattered the myth that Russia could permanently hold onto Ukrainian land. Every inch of regained territory became a direct message to Moscow. You thought you won, but you were wrong. Russian military analysts began admitting that the so-called special military operation had turned into a long, grinding disaster. The cost in manpower and resources was staggering. Thousands of vehicles were destroyed, tens of thousands of troops lost, and the economic sanctions were biting harder than ever. Russia's defense industry struggled to replace the losses, while Ukraine received continuous upgrades in both technology and support. What made matters worse for Russia was internal conflict. Rivalries among commanders, corruption within the ranks, and political infighting created deep cracks in the military structure. The Wagner mutiny was a clear sign of that chaos. When armed mercenaries marched toward Moscow, it exposed how fragile the system really was. Putin's image of absolute control was fading. The idea that Russia could dominate Ukraine had proven to be an illusion built on fear, propaganda, and arrogance. On the battlefield, Ukraine continued to strike with precision and purpose. Each counterattack was smarter, faster, and more coordinated. The use of combined intelligence from Western satellites and Ukrainian field reconnaissance created an almost perfect understanding of Russian movements. Every time Russia tried to regroup, Ukraine was already one step ahead. Even areas that Russia had heavily fortified, like parts of the Zaporizhzhia and Kherson regions, saw Ukrainian breakthroughs that stunned military observers. Behind every Ukrainian success was determination, the belief that this was not just a war for land, but for survival and freedom. Civilians turned into volunteers, engineers turned into drone builders, and farmers turned their machinery into war tools. This unity became Ukraine's greatest strength. Russia, on the other hand, relied on forced mobilization and fear-driven loyalty. Soldiers who didn't even understand why they were fighting were being thrown into deadly battles without proper training or equipment. As the months passed, Russia's belief in victory started to collapse from within. Soldiers returning home began telling the truth. They spoke of poor leadership, lack of support, and endless losses. Mothers and wives started demanding accountability. Protests quietly grew despite government suppression. The reality could no longer be hidden behind propaganda. Russia hadn't won. It had walked straight into a war it couldn't control. Internationally, this shift changed everything. Nations that once feared Russia's power began to see its limits. The myth of military superiority that Moscow had built for decades was broken. Even its allies began distancing themselves, wary of being dragged into the consequences. Ukraine, once seen as the underdog, now stood as a symbol of resistance that inspired the world. What Russia thought was a short campaign had turned into a prolonged humiliation. They underestimated Ukraine, underestimated Western unity, and overestimated their own capabilities. Every step they took forward eventually led them 2 steps back. Strategic blunders, arrogance, and outdated tactics became their downfall. The soldiers who had once thought they were marching to victory found themselves trapped in confusion and defeat. Now, as the world watches, the question isn't whether Russia can win, it's how much more it's willing to lose. Ukraine has proven that strength doesn't always come from size or numbers, but from resolve, intelligence, and unity. What Russia thought was the end of Ukrainian resistance was actually the beginning of its own unraveling. The story of this war is still being written, but one truth has already been revealed. Russia thought it had won, but it was dead wrong. Every bomb dropped, every city taken, every declaration of victory only deepened the cracks within the system. Ukraine continues to rise from the ruins, while Russia struggles to hold onto its fading illusion of control. In the end, history will remember not just who conquered land, but who stood for truth and freedom. Russia believed its might would bring submission, but Ukraine showed that courage can outlast any empire. What began as a war of domination has turned into a lesson in defiance, resilience, and the ultimate failure of arrogance. And so, as the dust settles and the world looks on, the message is clear. Russia's so-called victories were never victories at all. They were warnings, signs of overreach and pride before the fall. Ukraine, underestimated and outgunned, became the living proof that even the most powerful aggressor can be humbled when faced with a people who refuse to surrender. Thank you all for watching. If you found this story insightful, make sure to subscribe, like, and share the video to spread the truth. The fight for freedom continues, and so does the story of a nation that refused to die. Because sometimes those who think they've won are the ones who have already lost the most.